A black fisherwoman pulls a rusty container from the depths, but inside isn't treasure. It's a hidden room with a voice silenced for years. What she uncovers exposes a horrifying secret and changes countless lives. Watch until the end, and don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment where you're watching from. The wind off the Atlantic always carried a certain weight in Bay Haven, salt, cold, and a kind of heaviness that settled deep in the bones. Naomi Brooks knew that weight better than anyone. It was the same wind that had kissed her face as a little girl when she ran barefoot along the piers, the same wind that whipped through her hair the day she buried her husband, and now it was the same wind that burned her cheeks as she stood on the splintered deck of her old boat, the Maria Dawn, staring out at the gray horizon. 42 years old, a widow, and the mother of a 14-year-old boy, Naomi had spent her life fighting currents, both in the water and in the world. Her hands were scarred from decades of hauling nets, her skin weathered by sun and salt, and her back bore the quiet ache of endless labor. But the hardest battles were the ones no one could see. The notices pinned to her door threatening foreclosure. The sideways glances from townsfolk who still whispered that a black woman didn't belong on their docks, and the hollow promises from the bank that an extension might be possible, even though she knew it never would be. Fishing had never made anyone rich in Bay Haven, but it had once been enough to survive. For Naomi, even that was slipping away. The ocean had changed, the fish fewer, the storms harsher, and with every passing season her debts grew heavier. 2 weeks ago, the bank had called again, their tone polite but final. If she missed one more payment, she'd lose the boat. And if she lost the boat, she and her son, Caleb, would lose everything. Caleb didn't know how close they were to disaster. Naomi had kept it from him, just as she had hidden every final notice and past due bill. He was only 14, but already he carried too much weight for someone his age. He worked weekends at the bait shop, took care of the house when she was at sea, and never once complained when there wasn't enough for seconds at dinner. He had stopped asking for new sneakers. He didn't mention the field trip he had missed because they couldn't afford the fee. And yet, he still found ways to make her laugh, still hugged her tight when she came home soaked and exhausted. It was for him that she was out here now, before dawn, breath steaming in the cold, fingers stiff on the wheel, preparing for a trip that could very well ruin her or save her. The usual fishing grounds had gone barren. Everyone in town knew it, which was why half the boats never left the dock anymore. But Naomi had a plan, one born of desperation and stubbornness. She would push farther out into the deep than anyone else dared to go. Beyond the buoys, beyond the line her late husband used to call the edge of sanity, where the waters were unpredictable and the stories were darker. Don't you ever go past those coordinates, he had warned her once, back when he was still alive. That's not water for people like us. She had laughed then. Now she wasn't laughing. The old-timers at the bar still told tales about the dead zone, a stretch of sea where compasses spun wildly and nets came back shredded. Boats went dark out there, they said, or simply vanished. Naomi didn't believe in curses. She believed in overfishing, in shifting tides, in survival. But survival required risk, and she was fresh out of safer options. She tightened the ropes on deck, checked the fuel gauge for the third time, and exhaled a long, steady breath. This is it, she whispered to herself. One last shot. By the time the sun bled pale orange across the horizon, the Maria Dawn was chugging past the markers that most boats never crossed. The town behind her grew small and distant, a smear of rooftops and masts on the coastline. Ahead, only endless water stretched into gray infinity. Naomi's chest tightened as she watched the GPS blink with a slow, steady rhythm, guiding her deeper into the unknown. The engine groaned beneath her, complaining with every churn, but she coaxed it forward like an old friend. The hours dragged. The sea was too calm, a glassy, deceptive stillness that set Naomi on edge. Out here, silence wasn't peace. It was a warning. Still, she pressed on, pushing the boat farther and farther until even the gulls turned back. By noon, the last of the landmarks had vanished. Only water and sky remained. Naomi cut the engine, wiped the sweat from her brow, and began to prepare her nets. The movement was automatic, practiced muscle memory from decades on the water. But beneath that routine, her heart was pounding. This was make or break. If today failed, there might not be another tomorrow for the Mariah Dawn. She dropped the nets, watching them disappear into the dark. 50 feet. 100. 200. The line spooled out, a lifeline disappearing into a place few dared to touch. And then she waited. The boat rocked gently beneath her feet. The sky hung heavy and low. Naomi closed her eyes and listened to the familiar symphony of the sea, the creak of wood, the slap of water against the hull, the soft hiss of wind. Time passed slowly. She thought of Caleb at school, probably sitting in his worn hoodie, pretending not to care that other kids had more. She thought of her husband, gone, 5 years now, and how his laughter used to fill the cabin. She thought of her grandmother, who had been a domestic worker her entire life, and how she had told Naomi, "Baby, the world's going to try to drown you twice, once with water, once with doubt. Don't let it." The winch jolted. Naomi's eyes snapped open. The boat lurched sharply to the left, sending her stumbling into the railing. She grabbed the lever, heart hammering. Something was pulling. Hard. Too hard. It wasn't fish, not even a tangle of debris. Whatever it was heavy. For a terrifying second, she thought she might capsize. Her finger hovered over the release switch. But something inside her, that same fierce, stubborn spark that had carried her through widowhood, poverty, and every quiet cruelty life had thrown her way, told her to hold on. She worked the hydraulics carefully, inch by inch, muscles burning as the winch groaned and protested. The boat pitched under the strain, waves slapping against the hull with growing force. Naomi gritted her teeth and pulled. Whatever was down there, it was coming up. Minutes turned into an hour, and then she saw it. At first, just a flicker of something metallic beneath the waves. Then a corner. Then a massive, rust-bitten shape rising from the deep like the ghost of a shipwreck. Naomi's breath caught. It was a container, the kind used on cargo vessels, but unlike anything she had ever seen. No barnacles clung to its surface. No dents or breaks marred its sides. It was intact. Her first thought was salvage, scrap metal, money, enough to pay off a loan, maybe 2, but another thought followed quickly, crawling up her spine like a chill. What in God's name is that doing down here? It took her 2 more hours to secure the find. She rigged makeshift flotation barrels, lashed ropes until her fingers bled, and coaxed the container into a slow, uneasy tow. The sky had turned dark and bruised by the time Bay Haven's outline returned to view. Rain began to spit against the deck. The waves grew angrier, as if the sea itself resented what she was taking. But Naomi didn't turn back. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, she wasn't just dragging in empty nets. She was dragging in possibility. And deep down, something told her this wasn't just metal. This was a story, a secret, something that was never meant to be found. When she finally reached the dock, soaked and trembling, the container floated beside the Maria Dawn like a sleeping giant. Silent, rusted, and humming with mystery. Naomi stood there, rain dripping from her hood, staring at it with a mixture of exhaustion and awe. Her heart was still racing when a single electric thought cut through the storm in her mind. What the hell is inside? And with that question echoing in her chest, Naomi Brooks, a black woman the town had written off as invisible, unknowingly stepped into a story that would change everything. The storm rolled in hard and fast that night, drumming on the tin roof of Naomi Brooks's weather-beaten cottage, and rattling the old windows with every gust. But she barely noticed. She was still standing on the dock long after she should have gone inside, her boots soaked, her hands trembling from cold and adrenaline. The container, her impossible, unexpected catch, floated in the dark water beside the Maria Dawn, looming like some colossal secret dragged from the depths. Naomi stared at it as rain coursed down her face, her breath puffing in pale clouds. It didn't make sense. A container that size should have been torn to pieces by time and tide. It should have been covered in barnacles, twisted by pressure, corroded into nothing. Instead, it looked almost untouched. Too clean, too deliberate. And the symbols scratched into its sides, geometric patterns and strange lines, didn't belong to any shipping company she knew. For the first time in her life, Naomi was afraid of what she had brought home. But fear didn't pay bills. Fear didn't keep Caleb fed or the bank from taking their house. And fear had never stopped her before. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Naomi bundled herself in a heavy coat and headed back to the pier. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and cold, the sea unusually calm. The container bobbed quietly against the ropes she'd tied the night before, its hulking shape now painted orange gold by dawn. She stood there for a long time, crowbar in one hand, bolt cutters in the other. Both tools inherited from her late husband, their handles worn smooth by years of use. Her heart thudded painfully as she walked along the length of the container, running her fingers over the strange etchings. No numbers, no logos, no signs of origin. Just that heavy lock, recessed, industrial, and cold against her skin, like it was designed to keep something in rather than out. Naomi almost turned back. Almost. But then she pictured Caleb's shoes, the ones he duct-taped at the soles instead of asking for new ones. She remembered the eviction notices tucked in the drawer by the sink. And she remembered the promise she'd made to herself the night her husband died, that she'd never let life break her no matter how hard it tried. She set her jaw, positioned the bolt cutters, and squeezed with every ounce of strength she had. The steel groaned, resisting her at first. She reset her grip, braced her foot against the container's frame, and bore down again with a guttural cry. Snap! The lock gave way, clattering to the dock with a dull, heavy thud. Naomi's breath came fast now, clouding the air. She gripped the handles of the container's massive doors and pulled. They didn't budge. She tried again, harder this time, the muscles in her arms screaming in protest. Hiss. The seals broke. A rush of stale, bone-dry air escaped, carrying with it a smell that made Naomi's stomach twist. Not rot, not salt, not the ocean. Something old, something sealed, something that hadn't breathed the outside world in years. For a moment, she hesitated, frozen on the edge of something she didn't understand. Then, slowly, she swung the doors open. Darkness. Thick, suffocating darkness poured out like ink. Naomi's flashlight trembled in her hand as she clicked it on and swept the beam inside, and her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a shipping container. It was a room. Bolted to one wall was a metal-framed bed, the blanket still neatly tucked as if someone had just left it. A small table stood beside it, with 2 chairs arranged carefully around it. Shelves lined the far wall, stacked with sealed containers, books, and packages labeled in multiple languages. A thin rug lay perfectly flat on the floor. And taped to the steel walls were drawings. Childlike sketches of stick figure families, a blue house with smoke rising from the chimney, a smiling man with broad shoulders and a crooked red grin. Naomi's heart pounded louder with every step she took into the container. How was this possible? How had this room remained completely dry at the bottom of the ocean? No rust, no decay, no water damage. Everything inside was preserved, untouched, like time had simply stopped. Her flashlight flickered over a photograph taped near the bed. A man, a woman, 2 children, all smiling, all alive. They looked so ordinary, so heartbreakingly normal. And yet they were gone. Whoever they were, wherever they were, they hadn't been here in a very long time. In the corner, Naomi noticed a small locker. It was slightly ajar. She knelt and opened it carefully. Inside were folded clothes sealed in vacuum-tight plastic, a pair of children's shoes, a red sweater, and, tucked beneath them, a small silver device. A recorder. Naomi stared at it, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. There was a date written on the back, more than 10 years ago. Her thumb hovered over the play button. Then she pressed it. Static hissed, a low hum, and then a voice. A man's voice. Shaken, desperate, human. "My name is Ahmed Osman. If anyone finds this, please, you must listen carefully." Naomi's knees nearly buckled. She sank into the nearest chair, the recorder pressed to her ear. "We were promised safety," the voice continued, breaking. "It was a lie. They locked us inside. There was no light, no escape. They made us work. And when we tried to resist, they—" The voice cut off, swallowed by static. Then it returned, weaker now, trembling. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. Or I will be soon. They threw our container overboard to silence us. Please, please tell the world." Then, silence. Except for one final detail, a string of numbers, coordinates. Naomi sat there for a long time, unable to move. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the recorder. The words echoed over and over in her mind. We were promised safety. It was a lie. They locked us inside. This wasn't salvage. This wasn't scrap metal. This was evidence. Naomi barely slept that night. She made tea she didn't drink. She wrapped herself in 2 blankets and lay awake, staring at the water-stained ceiling as the wind howled outside. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't silence that voice. By morning, her eyes were bloodshot, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her resolve was steel. She wasn't just a fisherman anymore. She was a witness. After Caleb left for school, Naomi grabbed her raincoat and walked back to the pier. The container was still there, looming like a forgotten monument. She climbed aboard and opened the doors again. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The drawings fluttered softly in the breeze. The photograph still smiled from the wall. This time, she wrote down every word from the recording, every number, every plea. Then she searched deeper. She opened boxes labeled rice, iodine, antibiotics. She found notebooks, most blank, but one filled with names, ages, and countries of origin. Some of the names were crossed out. One, near the top, made her breath hitch. Yusra Osman. Age, 7. The same last name as the man on the tape. Naomi stumbled out of the container, gripping the edge of the dock to steady herself. The wind was cold and biting, but she barely felt it. There was no denying it now. This wasn't a single story. It wasn't a one-time tragedy. Somewhere out there, more people were trapped. More voices had been silenced, and one man's desperate message had just changed everything. Naomi Brooks, the woman everyone in Bay Haven ignored, was about to do something no one expected. She was going to make the world listen. By dawn, the wind had combed the harbor flat, leaving only a taut stillness that made every gull's cry sound too loud. Naomi didn't bother with coffee. She pulled on her raincoat, stuffed the recorder and the page of handwritten coordinates into her pocket, and headed for the truck. She drove the coast road with both hands locked at 10 and 2, watching the gray Atlantic flash between stands of spruce like a warning light. 30 miles south, the Coast Guard outpost sat on a rocky bluff, its antenna jutting into the sky like metal thorns. Inside, the place smelled of old coffee and salt-wet wool. A young man in a pressed uniform looked up from a clipboard when she approached the counter. "Ma'am, civilian access is—" "I need to speak to whoever's in charge," Naomi said, voice level. "It's about a container I recovered. There's a recording." His polite smile faltered when she set the battered recorder on the counter. "You recovered a container?" "From the bay, 23 miles out." She slid the page across, the numbers written twice over in a neat, unshakable hand. There were living quarters inside, supplies, a list of names. This, she tapped the recorder, is a man telling you what happened to him. The petty officer's gaze flicked from her face to the paper, then back again, skepticism cooling his features. "Where exactly did you say you were fishing?" "Past the usual markers." "That's restricted, miss. Brooks, Naomi Brooks." She didn't blink. "And I wasn't fishing by the time I found it." He hesitated, then reached for the recorder. "I can log this for evidence." "You can press play," Naomi said, and the steel in her tone startled even her. "Now." The first hiss of static filled the room. A couple of other uniforms drifted closer, drawn by curiosity. When the voice came, trembling, urgent, painfully human, the room's air changed. The clatter of a typewriter in the side office went still. The petty officer's jaw tightened. By the time Ahmed Osman reached the coordinates and the plea, "Please tell the world," no one was pretending this was a nuisance. A door opened down the hall. A man in his 50s stepped out, square-shouldered, gray at the temples, the kind of authority that didn't need announcement. His nameplate read Harris. He listened to the message without a word, eyes on the floor like he was tracing every sound to its source. When it ended, he exhaled once, slow. "You found this?" "In a container I towed in last night," Naomi answered. "It was sealed tight, dry as a cupboard. Someone lived in there. A family, from the look of it." Harris looked at her for a long moment, taking in the sea-stiff coat, the cracked knuckles, the steadiness. "Where is it now?" "Tied off at my dock." He nodded to the petty officer. "Get a team to secure the site, quietly." Then to Naomi. "Miss Brooks, I'm going to need the exact location of the recovery and the coordinates the man gave." She slid the page back. "They're the same ones I wrote down before dawn. I checked them 3 times. A younger officer, all sharp cheekbones and regulation skepticism, cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, there are protocols, and if she was beyond the buoys—" Harris didn't look away from Naomi. "There are also people. We'll follow both." He turned slightly. "Miss Brooks, can you show us where you were?" "I can do better than that," she said. "I can take you there." The room cooled another degree. The younger officer's mouth tugged. "Bringing a civilian?" "Bringing the only person who knows those waters better than our charts," Harris said. "If this is a trap, I want the woman who survived it at the wheel." He faced Naomi fully. "You understand the risk?" She thought of Caleb at the chipped kitchen table, of duct-taped sneakers and quiet courage, of a bed bolted to steel and a child's drawing of a crooked red smile. Yes. They moved quickly after that. While one team drove north to her dock to secure the container room, another prepped 2 patrol boats. Naomi radioed a single call to a neighbor. "Tell Caleb I'm helping with the Coast Guard. I'll be home late," then climbed aboard the Maria Dawn. The patrol boats flanked her with a formality that felt almost ceremonial, their white hulls clean as teeth. "Maria Dawn, this is Cutter 3, came the first crackling hail. "Maintain bearing 185, speed 6 knots. We're on your 9 and your 3. Naomi tightened her grip on the wheel and coaxed her old engine forward. The ocean darkened as they left the harbor's cradle. Fog lay in low veils across the water, and beneath the chatter of radios and the thrum of engines, Naomi felt the old instinct open in her chest, a tuning fork struck by distance and depth. The sea talked if you learned its grammar. The men on the patrol boats watched her as much as they watched the horizon. A few faces were openly doubtful, 1 or 2 more than doubting. She knew that look. The muttered calculus, black woman, small boat, big claim. She let their math do what it would. She had numbers that mattered more. Hours blurred into one another. The shoreline fell away, even the gulls abandoned them. The GPS cursor crept across the screen like a bead of mercury. The air tasted metallic, and the sky pressed low, the color of old pewter. Naomi fed the engine with small comforts, gentle throttle changes, a hand on the housing, the way she would rub Caleb's back when he was feverish. "Maria Dawn? Status?" Harris's voice slid in low and even through her radio. "Barren and speed steady, 2 miles out." She swallowed. 1.5. There were legends about this stretch of water. Compasses went silly. Sonar blinked. The sea took the light personally. Naomi watched the needle on her compass wobble, then settle. "Come on," she murmured, not sure whether she was talking to metal or God. Then she saw it, that wrongness against the horizon. At first, just a darker stripe where the fog was too consistent. Then angles emerged, hard and unnatural. A ship, massive, motionless, no flag, no name. Rust tears streaked its sides like old blood. It sat too still, like a predator pretending to be driftwood. "Visual on target," Naomi said, throat tight. "Copy," Harris replied. "All units reduce speed, approach in staggered V, lights low, no sirens." As they drew closer, details snapped into place. The high walls of stacked containers, the cluttered maze of cranes and cables, the black windows of a bridge that looked blind. Naomi raised her binoculars, scanned the stacks, and felt the hair lift on her arms. Movement, quick, furtive. Humans, not gulls. Confirmed movement, someone on Cutter 3 said. Multiple. Starboard stacks. Harris's voice hardened. "This is the United States Coast Guard," boomed the loudspeaker, hanging every syllable on the fog. "Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Comply peacefully." A beat of pure quiet. Then a single crack, sharp, flat, cut the air. A warning shot from somewhere high on the rusted labyrinth. Instinct jerked Naomi's head down. The patrol boats surged to life, engines raising their voices. Lines were spun, grapnels thrown, ladders clanged against steel. The boarding teams moved with insect precision, up, over, onto the dead ship. Radios erupted in clipped fragments. Starboard access secured. 2 hostiles detained. Non-compliant. Bridge appears unmanned. Repeat, bridge unmanned. Container modifications. What, in God's... Naomi's boat rocked in the ship's shadow. She could see nothing now but flaking metal and a slice of sky. Her hands clamped the wheel until her knuckles went white. A voice, she didn't know whose, breathed into a channel. They're inside. Her heart didn't so much beat as detonate, because even across steel and fog and radios, the sound that came next was older than any engine. Voices. Many. High, low, cracked, thin. A child's cry. A woman's hoarse whisper in a language Naomi didn't understand, but recognized in her bones. The sound of people stepping into air after too long underground. "Med team forward," Harris said, and the steadiness in his voice broke at the very edges. "Cut the locks. Bolt cutters on the modified units. Careful with the seals." Naomi stood it as long as she could. Then she tied off the Mariah Dawn to a fender line, grabbed her own coil of rope, and called across to the nearest patrol boat. "I'm coming up." A young ensign shook his head. "Ma'am, no civilians." She didn't argue. She threw the line, found a rung, and climbed. The deck smelled like rain and hot metal and something stale that made her throat close. The men in tactical vests parted instinctively around her, some out of surprise, some out of the unquestioned knowledge that whatever this was had started with the woman in the blue coat. Naomi moved through the container canyons by feel, following the voices. They had cracked one open like a rib cage. Inside, the room was colder than the air, airless in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. People blinked in the sudden light, 2 at a time, then 5, then a cluster. Men with gaunt faces, women whose shoulders drooped even as they stood, children clinging to wrists and sleeves. A little girl held a stuffed bear missing one eye. Her hair was plaited with a care that had outlasted hope. Naomi stopped in the doorway. The girl looked up at her. For an absurd, acute second, the entire world narrowed to the child's eyes, huge, black, reflective pools where fear and relief wrestled for room. Naomi crouched. "Hey," she said softly, not trusting her voice with anything more complicated. She touched her fingers to her own chest. "Naomi." The girl's lips moved. "Yusra," she whispered. The name hit like a bell struck in Naomi's ribs. "Yusra, Osman, 7. The inked lines on a page turned back into a child. Medical teams stepped forward, triage kits open, voices low. One of the men, eyes like dry wells, reached for Naomi's sleeve with a tenderness that undid her. "Water?" he rasped. She passed her canteen with both hands. He drank like a man relearning how to trust his own throat. The operation widened. More modified containers located, more locks cut, more lives pulled gently toward air. Not everyone could walk unaided. Some could barely see. A medic brushed past, murmuring, "Long-term deprivation, malnutrition, we need blankets and fluids yesterday." On the far side of the deck, a scuffle broke out. 2 crewmen in oil-stained coveralls trying to bolt. They were brought down fast, wrists cinched, faces turned to the metal. Naomi saw one of them look at her with naked hatred, and she watched the look slide into something like bewilderment when it met nothing but her steady, exhausted gaze. She had no room left for their fury. All of hers had been spent on staying. Through it all, Harris moved like a metronome, counting, directing, holding the pitch of the ship's heart. He caught Naomi's eye once and tipped his head, gratitude without ceremony. Then his radio crackled with the words every soul on that deck had needed, whether they knew it yet or not. "We found them," a voice said, ragged, unbelieving. God help me, we found them. By late afternoon, the dead ship looked briefly like a city. Lines of people wrapped in blankets, medics kneeling on aluminum cases, sailors hauling crates of water and MREs across steel. The fog thinned, and a pale sun shouldered its way through. Someone started a prayer in a language Naomi didn't speak. Another voice joined it. Then another. For a minute, the ship itself seemed to breathe. Miss Brooks. Harris's voice came soft from her left. He was splattered with rust dust, his calm finally threaded with something like reverence. You understand what you've done? Naomi shook her head once. I found a box, she said, and it wasn't modesty so much as accuracy. You cracked a network, he replied. He glanced towards the stacks, toward the doors yet unopened, and the names not yet matched to faces. There will be more vessels. We've heard whispers for years. This is the first time we can hold the lie in our hands. He looked back to her. We'll need your statement, your timeline, everything, but not now. He gestured toward the gangway. For now, I need you to stay where they can see you. They look for anchors in this kind of chaos. His mouth twitched. You look like one. The word lodged in her chest. Naomi swallowed and nodded. She wasn't sure what an anchor was supposed to feel like. Heavy, steady, immovable. She only knew she could keep standing as long as those eyes kept finding her and knowing they were not, after all, alone. The trip back to shore felt longer than the journey out. Not because of distance, but because of the cargo. Lives counted and accounted for, lying under tarps, lean against bulkheads, breathing. The radio traffic changed timbre. Words like ambulance, intake, interpreters braided through the static. Naomi stayed on the Maria Dawn, flanked by the cutters like dots in a protective ellipsis. She watched the coastline rise, the lighthouse, the spit of sand, the black knot of people already gathering on the pier as news outran them. As the harbor mouth swallowed them, sound swelled. Sirens shouted orders, the high, incredulous cries of people recognizing other people after too much time in the trenches of not knowing. Naomi tied off with hands that had finally begun to shake. She stepped onto the dock and the world surged. Reporters, cameras, questions flung like nets. Miss Brooks, did you know? Are these migrants? Were they? How did you? She kept moving, not rudely, just through. At the end of the dock, a man waited apart from the noise. His hair was grayer than the photo taped to the container wall, his shoulders narrower, but the eyes were the same. He held something in his hands, flat and familiar. The recorder. He had wrapped it in a strip of cloth as if it could bruise. When their gazes met, the chatter behind her faded to a muffle. He approached with care, like a person entering a church. My name is Ahmed Osman, he said, voice roughened by salt and time. You found my words. Naomi couldn't speak for a heartbeat. She nodded once, twice. I heard them, she said at last. He offered the wrapped recorder with both hands. She didn't take it, not yet. It felt too much like taking credit for a tide. Ahmed's mouth softened. Please, carry it until the others can. He glanced over her shoulder at the cutters still unloading, at the stretchers, the blankets, the small hands. You were the first to listen. The word threaded through her like a suture. First. Behind them, the harbor roared, sirens and questions and the metallic din of an operation bigger than one day. Before them, a line of people stepped onto the dock and did not fall. Naomi felt the old fear shake itself out of her bones and drop, finally, into the water where it belonged. She tucked the recorder close, as if it were a heartbeat that could be borrowed, and when she turned to face the crush of the town, she did not shrink this time. She stood where they could see her. The voices from the dark had found air, and now that they were heard, nothing, not the sea, not the men who'd used it as a vault, could make them silent again. The morning after the raid broke with the kind of quiet Bay Haven hadn't known in years. The harbor, usually filled with the clamor of gulls and engines, was hushed, as if the sea itself were pausing to listen. Naomi Brooks woke before the sun, the exhaustion in her bones deeper than anything sleep could fix. She stood in the small kitchen of her cottage, staring at the chipped mug in her hands as steam curled upward and disappeared. Caleb shuffled in, rubbing his eyes and dragging his backpack across the floor. "Mom?" he asked, his voice still thick with sleep. "You look different." Naomi blinked. Different how? He shrugged. Not tired, not like before. Before. The word landed heavier than he knew. Before, when their lives were nothing but bills and debt and empty nets. Before, when she was invisible, a name no one in Bay Haven bothered to remember. Before, when she thought survival was the best she could hope for. Now, there was something else in her. Not pride, exactly, but purpose. A steady weight that wasn't burden, but anchor. After Caleb left for school, Naomi walked down to the pier. The patrol boats were gone, but the harbor was alive in a new way. Workers were unloading crates of supplies from trucks. Aid tents lined the waterfront. Translators stood beside folding tables, helping dazed survivors fill out forms. Doctors moved briskly between makeshift clinics, and scattered among them, wrapped in blankets and leaning against railings, were the people she had helped bring back into the light. Some stared blankly out to sea, the trauma still holding them in invisible chains. Others spoke in hushed tones, their voices carrying the rhythm of languages Naomi didn't understand, but didn't need to. One young woman stood apart from the crowd, holding the hand of a boy no older than Caleb. Their eyes followed Naomi as she walked by. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. The gratitude in their gaze said everything. Harris approached from the direction of the main tent, a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Miss Brooks," he greeted, his voice softer now, touched with something close to respect. "I was hoping I'd find you here." "I couldn't stay away," she admitted. "I needed to see them." "You deserve to." He paused, studying her. "Do you understand what you started?" Naomi shook her head. "I found a box, that's all." Harris's jaw tightened. "You found proof, enough to open investigations that have been stalled for decades. Interpol's involved now. There are warrants, raids, task forces. We're uncovering a network that spans 3 continents. It's bigger than we ever imagined." "Then it's only just beginning," Naomi murmured. He nodded. "And every report, every press briefing, your name is at the center of it." The thought made her stomach twist. "I don't want any of that." "Then don't take it," Harris said simply. "But whether you like it or not, you've become a symbol. And symbols have power. They make people listen." The rest of the day blurred into a whirlwind of things Naomi had never imagined herself part of. She helped distribute blankets, carried water jugs, held trembling hands. When a young mother broke down in sobs, Naomi sat beside her in silence. When a boy panicked at the sight of a uniform, she knelt and showed him how to breathe through it. She didn't have the right words, maybe no one did, but she understood something deeper. Sometimes presence mattered more than language. Reporters came. Cameras followed her down the pier. They asked the same questions again and again. "How did you know? What made you keep the container? Do you see yourself as a hero?" Naomi answered honestly every time. "I didn't know," she told them. "I just couldn't let it sink." One journalist asked if she had ever been scared. She almost laughed. Always, she wanted to say. She had been scared her whole life. Scared of losing the house, scared of failing Caleb, scared of a world that treated women like her as if they were invisible. But fear had never stopped her. Fear had never paid a bill. Fear had never hauled a container from the ocean floor. When the interviews were done, Naomi walked home under a sky streaked pink and gold. That night, Caleb waited for her at the kitchen table, his homework spread out before him. He didn't look up from his notebook when he spoke. "Are you going to be famous now?" She smiled faintly. "I doubt it. But everyone's talking about you." "Maybe," she said, "but that's not why I did it." "Why did you?" he asked, looking up at her now, his brown eyes bright and searching. Naomi sat down across from him and thought for a long moment. "Because someone needed help," she said finally, "and because no one else was listening." He nodded slowly, as if he were storing her words somewhere deep. "I'm proud of you." The simplicity of it nearly undid her. She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm proud of you, too." In the weeks that followed, life didn't return to normal. It evolved. Naomi spoke at a town hall meeting, her voice shaking at first but growing steadier with each word. She urged people to speak up when something felt wrong, even if they didn't have proof. She reminded them that silence was often the accomplice of cruelty. She started organizing with other women from the harbor, many of whom had their own stories of being ignored or dismissed. Together, they pushed for better oversight of shipping routes, for tighter laws, for more accountability. Naomi even agreed to testify before a congressional committee, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because the people who had been silenced deserved to have their story heard on the record. Through it all, she stayed grounded. She still woke before dawn. She still checked the boat's engine every week. She still stretched every dollar until it screamed. But something fundamental had shifted inside her. For years, she had believed her life's horizon ended where the sea met the sky. Now, she knew it stretched far beyond that, past bureaucracy, past injustice, past fear. One afternoon, Harris found her on the dock, leaning against a piling and watching the waves. "There's talk of a medal," he said, "maybe even a commendation from the Department of Homeland Security." Naomi chuckled softly. "They can keep it." He smiled. "I figured you'd say that." "Medals don't matter," she said. "What matters is that people know this happened, and that we stop it from happening again." "Then you're already doing more than most," he replied. That evening, Naomi took Caleb out on the Mariah Dawn. The ocean was calm and endless, the setting sun painting the water in shades of amber and rose. For the first time, she let him take the wheel. His hands were unsure at first, but they grew steadier with each turn. "Feels strange," he said. "What does?" "Being in control." Naomi smiled. "It always does at first, but you'll get used to it." They rowed in silence for a while, the waves whispering against the hull. Naomi told him everything. About the container, the message, the raid, the people they saved. She told him about fear and responsibility, and what it meant to listen when the world went quiet. Caleb didn't say much. He didn't need to. The way he looked at her, not as a woman barely surviving, but as someone standing tall against the tide, said enough. As the sun slipped below the horizon, Naomi felt the familiar pull of the sea beneath her feet. But it no longer felt like an enemy. It no longer felt like something that took. For the first time, it felt like something that gave. The wind off the bay had softened into a whisper by the time the last of the rescue ships returned. Bay Haven, once a town no one cared to remember, had become a place the world suddenly could not ignore. Vans with government seals lined the waterfront. Journalists camped out along the docks. Helicopters circled like vultures, cameras pointing down at the old fishing town where a black woman and her rusting boat had changed the course of hundreds of lives. Naomi Brooks tried to avoid the noise. She stood apart from the crowd near a stack of abandoned crab traps, hands buried deep in her coat pockets, eyes fixed on the horizon. She had never liked attention, and now it clung to her like the sea mist, impossible to shake off. But this day wasn't about her. It was about them, the survivors, the ones who had been pulled from the belly of darkness and could now finally breathe. The harbor was alive with emotion. Ambulances waited with open doors. Aid workers rushed between tents. And in the center of it all, people stepped off the patrol boats one by one, thin, hollow-eyed, wrapped in blankets, blinking against the sunlight as if it were a foreign thing. Mothers clutched children to their chests. Elderly men leaned on strangers for balance. Some cried openly. Others stood in stunned silence. Naomi's breath caught when she saw him. Ahmed Osman. He was thinner than in the photograph taped inside the container, and his hair was streaked with gray, but the eyes were unmistakable. The same desperate eyes she had heard speaking through the recorder, the same voice that had guided her into this storm. He moved slowly through the crowd, scanning the pier until his gaze found her. For a long, heavy moment, they simply looked at each other. The noise around them faded into something distant and insignificant. Then Ahmed crossed the remaining distance and stopped a few feet from her. His hands were trembling when he extended one. "I thought the sea had swallowed my name," he said softly, his accent wrapping around each syllable. "But you gave it back." Naomi swallowed hard. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. Ahmed shook his head. "You listened, when no one else did." Her throat tightened. She took his hand and held it firmly. No speeches, no rehearsed words, just the quiet understanding of two lives that had collided in the strangest, most necessary way. That night, Bay Haven gathered for something the townspeople didn't quite know how to define. It wasn't a celebration. Joy felt like the wrong word. It wasn't mourning either. It was something deeper, something like a collective exhale. Dozens of candles were lit along the pier, their flames flickering on the dark water like stars scattered across the surface. A woman read names into a microphone. The names of those rescued, the names of those still missing, and the names of those who might never be identified. People bowed their heads. Some wept quietly. Others stood shoulder to shoulder in silence. Naomi stood beside Caleb, his small hand gripping hers tightly. "They're going to be okay now," he whispered. "Some will," she said gently. "Some are going to need time, but they're not lost anymore. That's a start." In the days that followed, the town transformed into something Naomi had never seen before. Government officials arrived in dark SUVs. Aid organizations set up food stations and temporary housing. Lawyers offered free consultations. The people Naomi had helped rescue began telling their stories, some in trembling voices, others with fire in their eyes. They spoke of betrayal and captivity, of cruelty and resistance, of how hope had been reduced to a whisper inside a steel box. And always, somewhere in those stories, Naomi's name surfaced. The woman with the old boat. The fisherman who didn't look away. The one who listened. At first, Naomi wanted nothing to do with the attention. She turned down interviews. She declined the talk show invitations. She even refused a medal that Homeland Security tried to award her. It wasn't false modesty, it was conviction. "This isn't about me," she told Harris one afternoon as they watched volunteers unload crates of medical supplies. "It's about them, about Ahmed, about Yusra, about every voice that was sealed in steel and thrown into the sea." "Maybe," Harris replied, "but you're the reason those voices were heard." Ahmed found her again a few days later. He carried with him a small tin box, dented and rusted with age. Inside was the recorder, the same one she had pulled from the depths of the container. "It should stay with you," he said, pressing it into her hands. "You found us. That story started with you." Naomi touched the metal gently, her fingers lingering over the worn buttons. "This story belongs to all of you," she said softly. "Then carry it for us," Ahmed replied, "until more are found." Eventually, the cameras stopped coming. The headlines moved on. The crowds thinned. But something fundamental had changed, not just in Bay Haven, but in Naomi herself. People no longer saw her as the widow with the failing boat. They tipped their hats when she passed. Children pointed to her with wide eyes. Women stopped her on the street just to say thank you. It wasn't fame. It was something far more meaningful. It was recognition that she had mattered. Months later, Naomi took the Mariah Dawn back out to sea. Not to fish, not to search, just to feel the water beneath her feet again. The ocean was still vast and unpredictable, still capable of taking as much as it gave. But Naomi no longer feared it. She stood on the deck at sunset, the horizon burning gold, the wind carrying the faintest hint of salt and change. The tin box, the recorder, rested against her chest inside her coat. She closed her eyes and let the silence settle around her, listening to the sea's endless, wordless song. "I hear you," she whispered, because she did. She heard every voice that had been silenced, every plea that had gone unanswered, every story the world had tried to forget. And she knew now, more than ever, that one person, one ordinary, overlooked person, could change everything. Naomi Brooks had never set out to be a hero. She was a mother trying to keep her son fed, a fisherman trying to keep her boat afloat, a woman trying to survive. But when life placed something frightening, unknown, and bigger than herself in her path, she did not turn away. She listened. She acted. And that made all the difference. The truth is, the world is full of unseen suffering, people trapped, silenced, or forgotten. And it is rarely governments or heroes who bring those stories into the light. It's people like Naomi, people who notice, people who care, people who choose not to walk away. You don't need permission to do what's right. You don't need a title to change the world. All you need is a heartbeat, a conscience, and the courage to listen. And sometimes, just sometimes, that is enough to move the tide. One woman, one choice, and a voice the world tried to bury now echoes louder than ever. Naomi proved that even the smallest act of courage can change countless lives. If this story moved you, subscribe, like, share, and tell us in the comments what part touched you the most.